Some games punish you for playing sloppy. These punish you for playing smart and still getting something slightly wrong. A missed turn order, a build point in the wrong stat, a save made at the wrong moment, and dozens of hours can collapse. Every game on this list earns its reputation. What separates them is how they do it. Vandal Hearts 2 replaced the original game's conventional turn structure with a dual turn system. When you move a unit, an enemy moves simultaneously. Every action you take triggers a response before you see the result. Positioning a unit for an attack means predicting not just where the enemy is, but where they'll be after they react to your move. Attacks can whiff entirely if the target moves out of range in the same moment you commit to striking. The system's punishment comes from its learning curve. Players who approach it like a standard tactical RPG, moving units toward obvious targets, consistently get flanked from behind, surrounded, or countered by enemies who respond to their formation's weakest point. The enemy AI follows predictable targeting logic once understood. It almost always attacks the nearest unit with their back turned, but that pattern isn't communicated anywhere in the game. Discovering it through repeated losses is how most players arrive at competent play. The weapon-based customization adds another layer where the punishment hides. Characters have no fixed classes. Stats and abilities are entirely determined by equipped gear. Investing in a character's setup without understanding which gear combinations create viable builds leads to units that look equipped but function weakly in actual encounters. The game's later optional battles, required for the best ending, spike significantly in difficulty relative to story missions and punish any gaps in the player's preparation. None of this is presented unfairly. The rules are consistent, but the game trusts players to work them out, and the cost of not doing so shows up in failed missions and dead characters. XCOM UFO Defense operates on a principle most games quietly abandon. The enemy has a strategy, and it doesn't wait for you to be ready. Alien forces launch missions whether or not your base is equipped, fund governments that cut ties with SCOM if you fail to protect them, and retaliate against your base locations once they find them. Playing cautiously by avoiding difficult missions creates a different kind of failure. Financial collapse when enough countries defect. Terror missions arrive with specific urgency. Civilians die in real time as the aliens work through a city, and not deploying means a score penalty severe enough to affect funding. Deploying unprepared to a terror site with chrysalids, the alien that kills a human and raises them as a zombie that births another chrysalid, is one of the genre's iconic punishment experiences. Losing a squad of experienced soldiers with no replacements trained, no interceptors fueled, and a base invasion scheduled is the cascade failure that ends campaigns. The early game is specifically hostile by design. Rookies die in one hit. Plasma weapons are unavailable until captured from alien corpses, which requires winning fights you're not yet equipped to win. Night missions cut your soldiers' vision to a few tiles while aliens see normally. Superhuman difficulty removes the enemy stat penalties that make the game balanced on lower settings and accelerates the alien tech tree. A difficulty bug in the DOS version actually reverted the game to beginner after the first combat, meaning most players who thought they were playing on higher settings were wrong, which makes the game's fearsome reputation even more earned at true difficulty. Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is the most mechanically hostile game in a franchise already known for punishing mistakes with permanent consequences. Every unit except the main Lord Leaf is subject to fatigue. Perform too many actions across a chapter, and that character is benched for the next one, whether you want them to rest or not. Healers, who by nature act constantly, tire the fastest. The game forces roster rotation not as an optional strategy, but as a survival requirement. The capture system is the primary source of weapons and gold, because Thracia gives you almost no money. To loot an enemy, your unit must physically weaken them through a half-stats combat exchange, then drag them off the battlefield. Mounted units count as having maximum constitution and can't be captured by most of your army. Miss the opportunity in a chapter, and you may not be able to afford the gear you need for the next one. Fog of War maps hide reinforcements that can spawn directly behind your formation. Staves can miss, including mid-battle recovery attempts. None of this is explained in-game. The original cartridge shipped with a manual that covered the mechanics. Playing without it leaves players to discover through repeated failure why their healer is suddenly unavailable or why a boss they just weakened can't be captured. The difficulty isn't random, but it is relentless, and the game's design philosophy, attributed to series creator Shozo Kaga, treats the player as someone who should already understand the rules of war before showing up to fight one. Hoshigami Ruining Blue Earth is the tactical RPG that genuinely couldn't decide whether it wanted to be brutal by design or brutal by accident. The RAP system, Ready for Action Point system, controls turn order and action economy in a way that takes real effort to internalize. Characters can bank unspent RAP to act sooner on their next turn, or spend it all for maximum aggression and become a liability. The session attack combo system rewards careful positioning by letting you bounce enemies between party members for chain damage, but setting it up requires your units to be in session mode at the end of their turns, which leaves them vulnerable. Permadeath in Hoshigami is permanent and ugly. A fallen character cannot be revived after the battle ends. They're gone, and replacing them means training a level 1 recruit from scratch while your existing party continues advancing. The game then places these decisions in battles designed to create pressure and losses. Campaigns where your secondary units are effectively sacrificed to protect your core group happen regularly enough to become a pattern. Where the difficulty crosses into genuine unfairness is the coin fame system. Around the midpoint of the game's roughly 60 hours, the coin-based magic system becomes the dominant, arguably only viable damage source for endgame encounters. Players who invested in standard melee builds hit a wall they can't overcome without starting over or grinding excessively. The game doesn't communicate this shift. Many players who reach that point and restart from scratch report finding it the most honest version of the punishment the game was always trying to deliver. Battle Brothers warns you before you start. The beginner difficulty is labeled beginner, not easy, and even that label undersells what's inside. Every mercenary comes from a background: farmer, beggar, disowned noble. And those backgrounds affect stats in ways that compound invisibly over dozens of hours. A poorly composed roster doesn't announce its weakness clearly. It reveals itself when your company gets wiped on a contract that looked manageable on paper. The economic layer makes every tactical mistake compound on itself. Losing a veteran means losing the gear he was carrying, the investment made in his training, and the recovery days that follow even if he survives wounded. Supplies deplete on the march. Morale drops when brothers die close together in the same fight. The world map generates crisis events, undead invasions, orc migrations that don't wait for you to feel prepared. A Goblin Knight ambush on an underprepared company, with ranged units firing from positions you can't locate until damage has already landed, teaches faster than any tutorial. The feedback loop is punishing in a deliberate, considered way. You're never powerful enough to absorb mistakes without real cost. Even a dominant late-game company can get dismantled by a poorly chosen contract on a bad map with the wrong terrain. The game has no story to cushion losses. Each dead mercenary was yours specifically, had a name, had a build that represented hours of decisions and investment. That's where the teeth are. Not in any single encounter, but in what each loss genuinely cost the company you've spent real time constructing. Underrail's version of punishment is slow and specific. It doesn't get obviously hard until the game has already let you build a character that won't work. There's no respec system. Every skill point, every stat allocation, every feat choice is permanent, and the game runs entirely on build viability. A psionic specialist with no investment in resisting psi feedback will be destroyed by enemies designed around that weakness. A melee build without crafting skills to make decent gear will hit an equipment ceiling that brute force can't push through. Depot A is the community named Rite of Passage, an early dungeon that functions as a hard filter on whether your build can survive the rest of the game. Players with suboptimal characters hit it and either push through by adapting strategy around their limitations or accept that restart is necessary. The game is transparent about this in the sense that the rules are consistent, but it provides almost no guidance on which combinations of choices lead to which outcomes. The underground world itself operates as a threat layer. Enemies don't scale to your level, which means wandering into the wrong section before you're ready results in getting killed by creatures you don't yet understand, using attacks you haven't learned to counter. Crafting is mandatory rather than optional. Buying gear is rarely sufficient, and the economy never becomes loose enough to paper over bad decisions. The reward for getting a build right and learning the systems is a game that becomes deeply readable and satisfying. The punishment for not is discovering hours later that you've been building toward a dead end with no map to guide you back. The original Tactics Ogre is a masterclass in punishing overconfidence. Enemy AI is built around elevation. Enemies occupy high ground by default, giving ranged units advantage from the start of almost every map. Moving a unit out of position doesn't just cost a turn. It can cost that character permanently. There's no reviving after the battle ends. If a unit's timer runs out and you fail to reach them in time, they're gone, along with any unique story content or recruitable characters tied to their political route. Certain units are only available through the Law or Chaos branch, so a careless loss mid-campaign can close off outcomes you didn't know existed. Hit rates are genuinely low, even with well-prepared units. Expecting reliable damage and getting let down by the dice repeatedly is a consistent experience, not an exception. The class system demands careful investment. Units start from level 1 in any new class, which means experimenting comes at real battlefield cost during active campaigns. Grinding to compensate means grinding through random battles that are their own endurance test. The difficulty isn't about any single encounter being unfair. It's about the cumulative weight of decisions made across 40 to 80 hours, where one careless battle can cost a character, weaken your roster, or close a branch you've been working toward. What makes it work is that every consequence feels thematically earned. This is a game about war, betrayal, and the costs of choices. Losing a soldier you spent real time developing doesn't feel like the game cheating. It feels like the war doing exactly what wars do to people who fight them. Final Fantasy Tactics is famous for one thing above all others: WeGraph. You arrive at Ryavane's castle, save over your file, and discover that the boss waiting inside is a solo fight against a single enemy who could delete Ramza in 2 moves if your build isn't where it needs to be. There's no leaving to prepare, no item screen before it triggers, and the game gives no indication of what's coming. If you save there with an underpowered character, you're either restarting from a much earlier save or your playthrough is functionally over. That encounter captures what makes FFT brutal. The game looks like it offers unlimited preparation time, then quietly removes it if you weren't paying attention at the right moment. Random encounters scale to your level, which means grinding for stats without simultaneously advancing job trees creates enemies that outpace your abilities. The class system is deep and rewards mastery, but building a broken character by accident is just as achievable as building an optimal one, and you only find out what you've done when the game puts you in a corner with no exits. Permadeath runs on a countdown. Units who fall in combat have roughly 3 rounds before they're lost permanently, creating constant pressure when multiple threats need managing simultaneously. The late-game character who famously trivializes the final acts arrives only after multiple moments designed specifically to end play throughs for underprepared players. The difficulty is front-loaded and uneven across the whole game, but the WeGraph fight has ended more campaigns in the tactical RPG genre than any other single encounter before or since.
You got my ear. You got my ear.
Jagged Alliance 2 is a game about asymmetric warfare in a fictional banana republic. and it commits to that premise in its difficulty. You're hiring mercenaries with real money and daily rates, sending them into sectors controlled by a competent, adaptive enemy force whose numbers increase over time. Every firefight is turn-based with action point precision, crouching, leaning around corners, bursting fire versus aimed shots, daylight versus night visibility, and every hit can wound in ways that require medical attention you may not have. The early game is where most new players die permanently. You arrive with pistols against enemies carrying rifles, which means range disadvantage in every engagement. Mercs you can afford early have lower stats and worse gear. Winning requires using terrain, line of sight, and timing over raw firepower, which is the point, but it takes losses to learn. On expert difficulty, the enemy actively flanks, climbs buildings and coordinates. A merc who dies on Iron Man mode is gone, along with whatever experience and equipment they were carrying. The strategic layer compounds tactical failures. Sectors you capture require defending. Mines that fund your operation can be retaken. Queen's forces launch counterattacks with or without your attention. The game's difficulty isn't artificial scaling. It's a persistent, functioning military opposition that punishes passivity as harshly as recklessness. Understanding that you're not clearing a map, but occupying and holding a country is what separates players who survive their first campaign from those who don't. The Age of Decadence tells you at the start that you're not a hero. You're a civilian in a dying empire, and the game means it. Character creation locks specialization hard. A skilled fighter can barely read. A skilled diplomat will die in any straight fight, and trying to split stats between both guarantees being bad at everything. The game routes around your weaknesses with stunning cruelty. A poorly built character will encounter situations specifically designed to expose the gap between what they invested in and what the encounter demands. Combat is tactical and lethal at the best of times, on characters not optimized for it. Fights that look winnable on paper become executions. The game doesn't protect you from entering combat you're not built for. It just ensures the outcome is appropriate. Failing a fight doesn't always mean death. Characters can be captured, enslaved, or left for dead, but each failure state opens or closes story paths in ways that can lock off entire sequences hours later. The design philosophy is explicit. Multiple playthroughs are expected, each with a different character spec experiencing a different slice of the world. A diplomatic character never fights their way through content. They argue, bribe, and deceive their way to outcomes a fighter couldn't reach. This isn't a flaw. It's the system working as intended. The punishment is for players who expect flexibility the game was never designed to provide. Once you accept that each character is a narrow, specialized tool for navigating a specific portion of a larger world, the difficulty transforms from frustrating to precise.